In studio today, we have a very special guest with us, the Canadian ambassador, Waschuk, who has served as Canada's ambassador to Ukraine since October 2014. And first off, Roman, we wanted to bring up the historic trade agreement that was signed between Ukraine and Canada in 2016 and was just ratified by the Ukrainian parliament.
Yes.
So the first question would be, symbolically, what does this agreement mean, and in practice, what does this agreement actually do?
What it does, first of all, what it means. What it means is Canada is open for Ukraine. That's the symbolic meaning. We have opened up with this agreement 98% of our market duty-free and quota-free for Ukraine. That's the biggest opening of any of Ukraine's trade agreements, apart from the now not quite operational CIS agreement. So a lot of the things that Ukrainians have difficulty getting into other markets, they'll be able to get into Canada's market problem-free. We still probably have a few weeks to go on the Canadian end for third reading in the Senate, royal assent, signature by the Governor General, and then exchange of letters. So we expect by midsummer this thing should be operational.
Okay. And what does it actually do? Like from
we have a graph, of course. We have prepared it, but really you can really tell it.
Okay.
To us.
Let's say you're a Ukrainian manufacturer of, let's say, coats or men's pants. Up until now, you've had to pay, or the importers had to pay 14, I think, or 15% duty. Now it's 0.
Okay.
So suddenly you've become that much more competitive in our market. Similarly, if you're a canner of peaches or apricots and you want to ship them to Canada, before you may have had a duty of, I think there's something around 7 or 8%. Now it's 0. So suddenly you've just got a price advantage over other countries that don't have a free trade agreement with Canada.
And by Canada now about to ratify this free trade agreement with Ukraine, does it legitimize Ukraine as a trading partner for other G7 countries as well?
Well, I think we hope it'll have a kind of positive halo effect. And the one thing that we've noticed about our free trade agreements is, A, they tend to at least double trade within the first couple of years, but they also tend to double investment, even though they're not investment agreements per se. But what it does is it attracts people's attention to this trading relationship, and they begin to look at offers, ideas for working with that country that they may never have thought of before.
Right.
And we're certainly seeing also a positive dynamic on the investment side.
And how would it interact with the EU free trade agreement that Canada signed?
Right. We're hoping and working on a kind of virtuous triangle. Because, for example, if you want to be a European manufacturer shipping into Canada duty-free, you now could locate some of that production in Ukraine. Similarly, Canadians wanting to export into Europe duty-free could locate some of their production in Ukraine as well.
Okay.
It's basically, the other good thing it does is, given the fact that we're also ratifying the EU agreement with Canada-EU as well, at the same time, it means that we've already harmonized many of our standards with those of the EU, so is Ukraine.
Right.
So it means we've come a lot closer on health standards, safety standards, product standards than before. So that makes life easier. If a Ukrainian company is qualified for Europe, it's probably now qualified for Canada too.
Okay.
Do we already know, before to finish with that, do we know about any kind of new deals which are coming? So what is, has something already big started, or we are still expecting?
Well, what we're seeing in the Ukraine to Canada direction, and again, the deal isn't yet in force, but we've begun to see more traction for Ukrainian companies. We're seeing some deals in the food sector. We've run some visits, and we're running some more this spring for Ukrainian food manufacturers to network with Canadian supermarkets and not just target the small ethnic market, sell mushrooms to people from Eastern Europe, but to come into the big Canadian nationwide networks.
And what are the concerns of probably Canadian businessmen? They probably ask you sometimes when they hear, like there are the Ukrainians in Canada, of course, but we're not speaking about them. They're speaking, this country, they have all these troubles with their war, corruption, all the things. What are the questions they ask?
People are concerned. I think what I do is I tell them it's a big country by European standards. I think Canadians are used to thinking of European countries as being small. Ukraine is about 25 Belgiums. So trouble at one end doesn't mean it's hot and impossible at the other end of the country. We're seeing, for example, a major boost in exports of concentrated apple juice coming from Western Ukraine to Canada. So you can source, Ukraine's a big country, you can source things. And also, it's not like Canadian business has never dealt with countries dealing with localized conflict before. We work very closely with a partner like Mexico in NAFTA. Mexico has had pretty traumatic experiences with what people there call a drug war. Of course, it's been a high degree of civil unrest, but affecting certain parts of the country, but then others have done business very effectively with Canada. Same with Colombia. Again, all comparisons are false. But there are ways of working with Ukraine, and especially I think clients in the IT sector have been very, very pleased and are also increasing their engagement with Ukraine right now.
Canada has, hugely supported Ukraine within the next during the last couple of years. We'll also have some figures for you. So there is a 6.6 million over 3 years to support the police training and system project, up to 1.5 million for police equipment, over 700 million technical and financial assistance to help restore stability, improve security, and implement democracy and the reforms. There are some other figures, so it's a bilateral development assistance to support economic reforms. Again, there are the funds for the negotiations. So it's all there, but and what we know, it's really the 10th part of the Canadian foreign aid for the countries.
Yeah, we were looking at the numbers, and since 2015 was obviously a big year for Canada to contribute to Ukraine. The numbers were staggering. It was almost about 10% of the international assistance budget of Canada went to Ukraine, which was about $500 million.
That included two big loans.
Right.
Yeah.
Are those numbers that are going, like the 2016 stats haven't come out yet, but
we're not going to repeat 2015.
Right.
That was an exceptional year. And I think some of the figures you've got there are a bit generous in that some of them are actually overlapping. Some of them relate to programs that are counted several times in your chart. But there's lots going on, no doubt. We have just extended our military mission, Operation Unifier. Keeping 200 soldiers abroad is not a cheap thing, and also we pay for a lot of the expenses of our Ukrainian partners as well. In doing this, we find it's been very effective, and we're looking over the next 2 years, because it's been extended to 2019, to kind of go up the value chain and look to see if we can have more impact by training non-commissioned personnel, officers, and others as we go forward with that mission. Certainly also carrying on with our development assistance, we will stay engaged on the humanitarian side as well. With the police and other security agencies, that's very promising. We've got, right now, I think 13, but could be up to 20 serving police officers also working as mentors with Ukrainian police.
What would you tell Canadians that they can expect as a return on that money?
They can expect a more successful, stable, and prosperous Ukraine that will be a better economic and security partner for us. I mean, last year was already a record year for Canadian exports to Ukraine since 1991. Your previous guests were talking about coal supplies. We are seeing a major acceleration in Canadian coal exports to Ukraine.
But Ambassador, there is a tweet we would like quote. Your tweet, you said, when it comes to rule of law and the integrity, we diplomats may be polite and well-meaning, but we are not blindly naive. So really, with all that support, you know, like, are all this money used in a good way? You know, do you feel that something could be, I know, either stolen or somebody would be not efficient? And these are the funds. I mean, I'm a Ukrainian citizen. Of course, I would say that would be good. The Canada supports Ukraine, but you're accountable for the money of the people who paid for the taxpayers. Also, Ukrainian taxpayers care where their money go, and also don't want that their foreign funds are misused.
Yeah, that's why we target carefully. We generally don't simply give money to untested government entities. We work with partners who have a track record, whether it's civil society, whether it's international implementation partners. So, you know, we're very careful in the audit trail of what we do. That's why we want the audit of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau to be decided transparently, fairly, in a way that both Ukrainians and foreign partners can trust as well.
But aren't you frustrated somehow at some points with how slow the reforms are, or other particular things which raise your concern?
You know, if Ukraine were a simple case and like easy, snap your fingers and it's done, it would be marvelous, but it's not. It's a long, iterative process. Plus, I'm a lifelong bureaucrat, and I know that changes, especially in government, are not instantaneous. So it means you have to keep at it. I think it's very important to keep a sense of perspective, not to get freaked out about every deviation from an agreed plan as the end of reform as we know it. It means keeping both support and applying advocacy when required.
So what are the fields where you think there is a progress and where you closely looking with some hope that things would be not so disappointing?
Ooh, that's a triple reverse negative there, I think. Well, where I see progress is at local level. Decentralization is something that has happened on the financial side. Especially, it means local communities have many more resources. We have a project that works with 16 cities in 4 oblasts of Ukraine on local economic development and strategizing. And, you know, some people have asked me, writing another strategy, how useless is that? But in fact, when you've got a community that now has more money than ever, and mayors and councillors and civil society and business need to decide together on how to spend it, so that you don't just patch another window or fix a road, but actually start working strategically, that is a good place to be. And what I've been hearing from mayors for the past 6 months is we used to be in survival mode, now we are in actual growth and doing something permanent for our communities mode. So I find that very positive. I think the rule of law is Ukraine's major Achilles heel. There's a sort of, you know, the go-along to get-along culture of people in power gets in the way of actually finishing any case that has been started. So therefore, there is considerable attention to high-profile cases, to the audit function at NABU. We are supporting, but also watching closely, the recreation of the Supreme Court. We've have for years supported judicial training, but now also have a project that is supporting this reform. I think as well that there would be room for some pilots of local level courts as well, so you don't have to wait 2 or 3 years for change at the local sort of judicial level. That's the area that I think it bothers Ukrainians most, and what bothers them then starts bothering us.
And when we look at the, you know, global politics, of course, we're looking closely. We're discussing all the time the change in the White House in the United States. And therefore, Canada has become and is, you know, one of the strongest, let's say, allies of Ukraine in G7. If we speak about the big powers and somebody who speaks totally different on Russia if we compare with Mr. Trump. Hristia Freeland, your new Minister of Foreign Affairs, who has Ukrainian roots and who has worked here and in Russia, knows well the situation. So how you can really explain her role, what we can expect of the, because there are, of course, the expectation, and how much she can do being somebody, a person who is not allowed to and banned to travel to Russia, who has a totally, pretty unusual, relations and pretty unusual person if we speak about the foreign ministers, a former journalist.
Yeah. Her job one in the past couple of months has been to ensure that we have a viable relationship with the new administration in the US. And I think she's done a very good job of that, as has our Prime Minister. They have gone the extra mile to build relationships, to even where there are policy differences, to keep dialogue open and to show openness in various ways, even through culture. The Prime Minister was in New York beginning of this past week.
Broadway show. Come
From Away, a Canadian Broadway show, about openness to people who come to your country. In this case, planes diverted on 9/11, but it's, you have to find various subtle ways of getting your message across, but in a way that doesn't also disrupt the relations with what is for us a very important partner. So we see ourselves as being able to, help bridge some of the gaps that may be emerging. Again, all of our G7 partners have their own dialogue channels, but we currently have good open channels with all of them. And we think that's an asset in terms of that Canada can bring also with regard to Ukraine and its issues.
How it will talk and how she will talk to the Kremlin?
That has yet to occur. So I am not going to prejudge how it's going to happen. We obviously have diplomatic relations. My colleague in Moscow is on the job. It is something that is in part also up to Russia. I think when the question was posed at the press conference announcing her appointment, and she was asked, do you see that as a problem? She said, it's Russia's problem. So I think we will be waiting for some outreach from there.
Do you see Canada taking more of a leadership role when it comes to the Western response to Ukraine? Because the U.S. foreign policy towards Ukraine is, at best, seems scattered right now?
Again, we are not commentators on other people's foreign policies, and we are pursuing what Canadians expect. Canadians expect a Canadian policy that strongly supports Ukraine and that acts on it in a multilateral context as well as the bilateral context. So that's what we're going to be doing. I think you just need to look at the votes on the free trade agreement that we started off talking about. In the House of Commons, 304 to nothing in favor, in the Senate 102 to nothing in favor. So there is in the Canadian political spectrum, complete consensus on this. And the government acts accordingly.
Mr. Ambassador, thanks a lot for all the points. We really enjoyed the talk, and we'll be back in a second.